Welcome on in to the Week 9 wide receiver fantasy football rankings. We are getting going. The season's cruising. Hopefully you guys are doing good in your leagues. And hopefully I've been helping out with that more than not. So we're going to go through some of the interesting usage information. That information is going to come from JJ Zachariason. He, every week, on the social medias, he puts out a bunch of usage information. No context really involved. I go through it. I choose what I think is most relevant, potentially, hopefully, going forward. And might give a little bit of additional context to some of it. So we'll go through that. We'll go through my loves and my fades of last week. How did I do with those? And then we'll get to the rankings and my loves and fades for this week as we go through the rankings. Let's start off with the interesting usage. We got Quentin Johnston's target share has dropped significantly for the third straight week in a row, so that's not great. Zay Flowers has a 31.5% target share on the season, had a massive target share last week. Remember 2 weeks ago when I said that Kendrick Bourne would be forgotten about in 2 weeks for fantasy football purposes? Well, the last 2 weeks' target shares now, Juwan Jennings, 30.4%, 22.6%. I don't know which 2 weeks those were for either of these cases. Kendrick Bourne, 9%, 13%. That's not fantasy relevant. 9%, 13%. No bueno, and we're probably going to be getting Brock Purdy back sooner than later, at least 2, so that's just going to be all the more targets, not going to Kendrick Bourne, I assume, with Brock Purdy. Houston receivers with no Nico Collins. It was Higgins and it was Hutchinson. They were the primary receivers. Higgins, the backup to Nico Collins. It makes sense. Hutchinson has been the other guy for the most part this year, so that also made sense that they were. And Jalen Noel's role did not change. He continues to be the slot receiver while there is no Christian, that guy. I don't know why I can't think of his name, but... So for as long as he's out, Noel gets targeted at a high rate. He's not on the field the most because he is just a true slot, and that's kind of all it is. So there is a little bit of risk as well to those targets, making it his way and everything, just because he's not on the field so much. New England wide receiver Kayshon Boutte has had over a 20% target share in 2 of his last 3 games. That's very, very promising. He didn't have over 20% target share in any of the first 5 weeks, so that helps, obviously, with the floor. Getting those targets goes a long way. Stephon Diggs is averaging a 29.5% target share over the past 5 weeks. Jahan Dotson was on the field for all but 1 dropback with no A.J. Brown, of course. Tez Johnson, with all the injuries that they have going on, ran all but 1 route for Tampa Bay. Denver wide receiver Pat Bryant continues to see an increased role. We've been kind of tracking this. It's the type of wide receiver that Sean Payton likes, so it's not too surprising that he's getting more involved. I assume probably Marvin Mims is the one that gets knocked the most for this, but he's also the most similar to... Courtland Sutton. So, yeah, I don't know. He's not going to replace Courtland Sutton this year, but nonetheless interesting to see that. And did he come through with a touchdown or something this week? Tennessee wide receiver, I think is pronounced Shimray. I've always pronounced it Shamari or Shamir, but Shimray DK, I also think is pronounced DK. Don't know if people are just afraid to say Dyke or something like that. But Tennessee wide receiver, he saw his role skyrocket after a strong Week 7 performance. Of course, this almost certainly has at least something to do with Calvin Ridley, so it'll be interesting once Calvin Ridley comes back to see how that might impact him getting on the field and all that good stuff. Christian Watson came into a 65% route share in coming back. I mean, they weren't lying. He pretty healthy, I guess. So that is great. That was just 4 fewer routes run than Matthew Golden, so it'll be interesting to see next week. Will that impact Matthew Golden? I don't quite think so, but once Jaden Reed comes back and Dontavian Wicks, a lot of mouths to feed. Roman Wilson, Pittsburgh wide receiver, love of my life. So he's not like my favorite wide receiver prospect ever, but I was big on him this offseason. He saw his 2nd week in a row with running over 50% of the routes. Those were both season highs for him, so an increased role for him as of late. We'll see if that is something that continues, and I mean, that's big in part this week because Calvin Austin was back this week, and for the most part, he's kind of been sitting behind Calvin Austin. So maybe they're getting a little more spread wide receivers, more wide receivers on the field, a little less just going all tight ends or something like that, too. Could be part of that reasoning. Maybe it was because of matchups. I don't know, but let's keep an eye on that. I do think he is a talented guy who could be fantasy relevant, potentially. And also, well, that's it. So, for my loves, for my fades last week, I loved Teteroa McMillan. So, yeah, he gets all the targets and everything. It comes through. He has an okay day, so that's part of why I love him. Sometimes loves don't come through in the big way that you really want them to, but part of the reason that you love them is because even if they don't have a massive day, they should still have a fine day that's not going to lose you the week. And that was mostly like kind of the case there with Teteroa McMillan. T. Higgins does come through. I loved him. Only 2 targets. That was not great, but he came through a similar day to Teteroa McMillan as far as my memory recalls for half PPR purposes. Full PPR, like Teteroa McMillan, all the better. Darnell Mooney was a love of the week. Suggested so many people to start him. I'm sorry. I thought that floor was pretty darn safe. It was not a good game. Not a good game for him. Not a good game for that offense. Just, there was several of these instances last week where things did not go as pretty much anybody expected. Sorry about that. And then Tez Johnson was a love of the week. I don't think that didn't work, right? Yeah, they didn't. That was a bad game for Tampa Bay, too. Another one that was a bit surprising. And then my fades, another surprising one here. Jalen Waddle was a big-time fade for me. I still had him ranked fairly well, high up in my rankings. And I did still, for the most part, tell people I stand by where I have him ranked, but I'm fine sitting him. So I tried focusing on that when people ask me questions about starting or sitting Jalen Waddle. I hope you ended up just starting him and trusting my rankings that I was standing by and not my nudge towards maybe sitting him, because he has a monster week, and that was the reason why I kept him ranked there. That was always possible. Just, wow. Who predicted that game going like that? Crazy. This year in the NFL, I feel like we say this every year, like the parody of the NFL. It is always pretty great, but man, it feels a little more intense this year. Like, who are the good teams? Who are the bad teams? What's the middle of the league? There aren't a lot of ambiguity and a lot of just interesting. It's been a fun year for that. Juwan Jennings and Kayshon Boutte were my other fades. Did I fade? Yes, I did fade Juwan Jennings. He doesn't really come through. Kayshon Boutte did come through. He ends up, and this was the thing about him, and I did have him a little too low in my rankings, and I try not to fade and put the guy too low, but I just did. And so he comes through with, the big catch, and that's the thing about Kayshon. That'll always happen. But as we went through with the interesting usage information, now, 2 out of the last 3 games, he's over a 20% target share, too, whereas previously he had been 1 game in the first 7 games with over 20% target share, and that was, part of the concern, was just, living off of a few targets. So if that can continue, starting to look all the better for Kayshon Boutte, getting out of maybe that Jameson Williams territory and moving up into, I don't know, a better, what we expected Jameson Williams to be, at least more good than bad. So that would be very promising. That's going to bring us on to the Week 9 wide receiver rankings. Please like the video if you're getting good information out of this or whatever, just to help me out. It is very, very much appreciated. It helps a lot. And also, I definitely want your feedback. Do you have any kind of feedback about any of the interesting usage information, any kind of context that you think is relevant for those, any bits of information that you've picked up that you noticed watching the games? Let us know in the comments. Let others know. Share your information. Share your wealth of knowledge. It is appreciated, as well as letting me know what you think I got right, what I got wrong with the rankings. And I know we're going to probably focus on what you think I got wrong, and that's fine, but let's provide some evidence why you think a guy should be higher or lower. Once again, too, as always, the tier is ultimately more important than the specific ranking, okay? If a guy is in the same tier as another guy, they can be shuffled around, and I'm not going to argue against it at all. And even beyond that, I mean, there's, still, I'm not going to always argue against it. But these are ultimately my feelings. Here is going to be the first tier, and we got a big tier, and I could always cut this down into smaller, but I try to give a general. So, like, these are the guys who I just think you gotta find a way to get them in your lineup for the most part, in most leagues, in most situations. Let's go. Let's play these guys without any real doubt. Don't ask me if you should start them. Just start them. Over here on the left-hand side, we got the fantasy points. It's on a scale of 0 to 36. It is adjusted by average fantasy points per week on a scale of 0 to 36, adjusted for consistency, as well as sometimes cherry-picked if a guy got injured early on in a game. We're trying to predict the future with this number, so that doesn't count for a game where we expect him to play the entire game. So there is some of that going on. And if I remember to, I will try to point out any instance where that where I really fiddled with that. And where you see that the most is with the running back rankings. Guys, running back rankings video will come out this evening, Wednesday evening. Quarterbacks and tight ends video comes out in the morning on Thursdays every week, so check those videos out as well. Then, of course, we've got the average targets per week here, which once again would be cherry-picked inequality to here. And the reason that we look at this number is because there is a correlation between opportunities, targets, and production. So it is a signal one way or another. It can be a signal in the case of DK Metcalf, of a guy who's maybe overproduced. Jalen Waddle, he got all those touchdowns early on in the season on not a lot of targets. But now he is the guy there with no Tyreek Hill, so we do expect those targets to continue to increase, and so I'm not so afraid of this. DK Metcalf's just that type of receiver who's going to kind of, have a lot of yards on a low amount of targets and is a threat in the red zone, so it's not too surprising to see a little bit of a disparity in here. But nonetheless, you can look for guys who might be overproducers, underproducers, based on some of the differences here between the targets and the production when you're looking to make some sort of trades, get rid of someone, buy low, sell high types of candidates. This can help to guide that information. And then we've got the early week Las Vegas spreads, implied point totals off of those spreads. They can help to guide some of our decisions as well. But none of these are all just data points. None of it directly tells us exactly what to do. They're just little puzzles, pieces to the story. By the way, guys, injuries. Luther Burden had a concussion. You would not expect him to be back this week, but he always could be. He should be back within 2 weeks, but it could be longer. And Terry McLaurin left the game late due to his quad injury. Apparently re-aggravates it. I would assume tweaks it to some extent, and they're not really in the game anymore, so why put him back out there? Maybe he would have stayed out there if it was a closer game. That would be not my assumption, but that is obviously a possibility. So I am ranking Terry McLaurin. I'm not overly afraid of it, but that is definitely something we will be keeping our eye on through the week, just like we will keep an eye on Drake London's status. He is expected back, so I am ranking him, but we don't know for sure if he's going to be back this week. So these are your must-starts. We've got Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice, JSN, Amon-Ra St. Brown. These 6 are just like the most elite must-starts. There's zero chance that you're sitting them in any kind of league. I can't imagine. And then Rome Odunze right behind that in a really good matchup here against Cincinnati. Justin Jefferson a little bit lower. I am worried with J.J. McCarthy now being his quarterback that we'll see a little bit lesser in that production, and that running game now a little bit healthier too. And with J.J. McCarthy at quarterback, might want to rely on that run game a little bit more when possible. Of course, in a week up against Detroit, expect them to be in a big-time negative game script. Expect them to having to be passing to catch up, so should be a good amount of targets still coming Justin Jefferson's way. Ultimately, Devontae Adams with Puka Nacua back moves down just a little bit, but going up against New Orleans, tough to get him too much lower based on what he was doing, even with Puka Nacua in the lineup. Michael Pittman, it's been great. It's a really good matchup against Pittsburgh. George Pickens right behind that. It's a really good matchup against Arizona. I just have him a little bit behind some of these guys because I think the risk of 4 targets is higher for George Pickens than several of these guys. Drake London going up against New England would have a little bit of concern. Also coming back from injury with Darnell Mooney back, he's had less targets, less production while Darnell Mooney's in the lineup, generally speaking. And so there is just that added concern, along with Christian Gonzalez being on the opposite side of the field covering him. That's a tough matchup for Drake London. Like, Christian Gonzalez is a physical, bigger body type of cornerback, so he could keep up with Drake London pretty well, make it a little bit tougher for him to come down with some of those targets. The over-under, not the best either here, so he just moves down a little bit more than, you might expect. DK Metcalf against Indianapolis, a solid matchup here for a guy who has been producing, and you would expect that he might be able to have another big day there. Ladd McConkey, things have been turning around for him. Now seems to be the number one guy in that wide receiver room in recent history. And on the season, basically, he has turned that corner as well. Going up against Tennessee, it's a good matchup. They just got rid of Roger McCreary as well in their cornerback rooms. That cornerback room's even worse than it was. So, positive vibes there. Zay Flowers getting a lot of targets going up against Miami. It's a good matchup. Although Miami teams do tend to run the ball a lot on Miami, but if that offense can start to get going, that's gonna flip a little bit. And so then teams will have to pass on them more. And so you can see the over-under absolutely fantastically high here, and we hope Lamar Jackson back. Jalen Waddle going up against Baltimore other side of the field. Baltimore has been one of the better matchups on the season, and Jalen Waddle's the guy, and he just had a really, really tough matchup where he really shined. So I would imagine it's pretty hard to try to sit Jalen Waddle. That is going to bring us on to our next tier of wide receivers. So those were the must-starts. These are the should-starts, near must-starts in most, 12-team and beyond, 10-team and beyond leagues even. So we start off here with T. Higgins going up against Chicago. Tyreek Stevenson is not expected to be back either. That, of course, helps Ja'Marr Chase all the more. Could be a game where we once again see only 2 targets go T. Higgins' way or something, but I do think there's a pretty good chance that we see T. Higgins connect on a few targets this game, and hopefully we get more than 2 opportunities. Nonetheless, I really like it. Marvin Harrison, going to be a love of the week for me this week, going up against Dallas. It's pretty much the best wide receiver matchup that there is, and they also have their own cornerback woes with Diggs out. He is on IR now, and over-under's fine there too. So, I think fire up your Marvin Harrisons this week. Not that it's any kind of guarantee, but I'm loving him this week. Nico Collins, Chris Olave, Brian Thomas Jr. Really ultimately could just shuffle these in any which way. To me, this decision would depend on what you're looking for, a floor or a ceiling. Ultimately, that decision is between Chris Olave and Brian Thomas Jr., but I'm going to wrap up Nico Collins in here because technically Chris Olave does have a higher floor and has produced more on this season, and Nico Collins is in a worse matchup than Chris Olave is. But I think Nico Collins provides you a higher ceiling still than Chris Olave does, and Denver does not have Patrick Surtain this upcoming week, so that is huge. Could go a long ways. Of course, that pass rush could really cause a lot of headaches for this Houston offensive line and make it hard for the connection to happen to your big boy that you want to connect with down the field. So there's still some concerns with that, because that's what the issue has been all season long, and a good pass rush could really negate that. Nonetheless, between Brian Thomas Jr., Chris Olave, if that's the decision that you are making, do you want the ceiling? Because that's Brian Thomas Jr. going up against Las Vegas. But the floor is definitely worse for him than it is for Chris Olave. And then Courtland Sutton is a fade of the week for me, going up against Houston. Derek Stingley on the other side of the field there. They're kind of getting these other wide receivers more and more involved, a little bit more consistently in general as well. So I do think that it's a fragile game, and I am also trying to pull the reverse curse. I definitely, rarely get 100% of my loves and my fades correct, so I'm hoping that I'm going to be completely wrong, because I'm going to be starting Courtland Sutton almost certainly, and I could use a good game from him. And then I've got Terry McLaurin in here. Of course, we're going to keep an eye on that injury situation. Going up against Seattle, he looked good, made some really, really good catches, and should have Jaden Daniels back this week as well. So, I'm on board to this extent where I think, yeah, you probably got to play him. The upside's pretty nice for him. And he actually, in games where he and Deebo Samuel have played, I did alter these numbers a little bit, he is performing better than Deebo Samuel. So I am looking at just games where both of them were active so far in this season. And I know it's felt like it was bad for Terry McLaurin, and it's felt like Deebo Samuel's been so good on the season. But in games where they both played, Terry McLaurin has been the better wide receiver for fantasy purposes by an extremely thin margin up to this point in the season. Tetairoa McMillan, and that's what we would expect going forward. I would still draft Terry McLaurin ahead of Deebo Samuel if we were doing a redraft today. For the most part, with that injury thing, who knows? We'll see what that news is coming out this week. Tetairoa McMillan going up against the Green Bay Packers, not a fantastic matchup. He is a bigger body wide receiver, so if there's any type of wide receiver that they could struggle against, that tends to be the type of wide receiver that they struggle against the most. But, I'm not expecting anything huge, so he's in this, you're probably starting them wide receiver 2, but low-end wide receiver 2 territory. Him, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston. Keenan Allen just feels like the safer play at this point. It's felt like that kind of all season. His target share is the most reliable in this. Hopefully that's going to change to Laird McConkey's is the most reliable, but nonetheless, it's been good in terms of just getting those targets and that floor for him, whereas QJ, coming off of a 0-point week, terrible, but he's still had a really good season. I'm not willing to just completely shut it down yet. He's still going to have big games going up against Tennessee here. It's a really good matchup for him to potentially have one of those big play types of weeks. So he's still going to make it in here for me. I understand if you don't feel comfortable playing him and you just want to sit him, but I'm not even going to fade him here up against Tennessee. Xavier Worthy going up against Buffalo, high-scoring game. Deebo Samuel going up against Seattle. His target share has been something that's been pretty darn consistent. Jauan Jennings is going to be my next love of the week here, going up against the New York Giants. It's a good wide receiver matchup. He seems to be fairly back, and especially if we can get Brock Purdy, I'm going to feel all the better about where I have him ranked. If I'm kind of thinking that we're going to get Brock Purdy back at this point. I believe that's who I have ranked. Pretty much have all the all the quarterbacks ranked. All the ones that have been out as of recent, I have them all ranked this week. It looks like they all have a good chance of coming back. So for Jauan Jennings, I really, really like that connection that he has with Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy's a better quarterback in terms of scoring and the New York Giants matchup. I think Jauan Jennings, a very solid start this week. And then Travis Hunter. Look, a little bit some people out there are just completely poo-pooing this. As Travis Hunter, it was all garbage time. And to some extent, you could argue that it was, but to some extent, it really also wasn't. I would argue that the earliest in a game that garbage time truly happens is going to be once there's 8 minutes left in the game. Until then, anything can happen. Yes, defenses might start to pull back a little bit, which could definitely have helped Travis Hunter, but when you look at the game, in the first half he has, I thought it was 6 targets, but maybe it's 6 targets early on in the third quarter that I'm remembering from my memory, because we were watching this game while I was doing I think it was the Sunday morning game, right? So we were watching it while I was doing the live start-sit stuff a couple of weeks ago. And, a lot of people were poo-pooing Travis Hunter, and I was like, he's getting targeted, guys. And he was. So, 4 targets in the first half, going for 8 targets. 8 targets is good, That's Brian Thomas Jr.'s average. That's just shy of Ladd McConkey. That's the same as Rome Odunze has been getting on the season, higher than Michael Pittman, same as George Pickens on the season, and he's, been the guy for more games than not, or roughly the same amount of games as he's played with CeeDee Lamb. So, 8 targets is nothing to poo-poo at in terms of opportunity. It wasn't turning into much. And then in the third quarter, you get 6 targets for 30 yards. So, yeah, not turning into much, but 6 targets in the third quarter. So we're up to 10 targets before we hit the fourth quarter. And then in the first drive of the fourth quarter, so before we hit that 8-minute mark, when yes, it's 28-0 at this point in the game. Yes, the defense might be a little bit more lax. Almost certainly a little bit more relaxed at that point in the game. Nonetheless, it's still a game, I believe. So he gets 2 receptions, 55 yards, and a touchdown on that first drive. Couple of big receptions, a 21-yard and a 32. That one worked. 23-yard and 32-yard reception or something like that, or maybe 21 and 34 for the touchdown there. Big play. And obviously, touchdowns are a big part of having big fantasy weeks, but you saw the targets come in his way for the first time ever, really, at a high rate. And then you saw the connection start to develop there as the game went along, and then a couple of big plays. These types of things happen to receivers all the time. I mean, receivers have nothing days, and then they have one big play and a touchdown or something in the fourth quarter, whether it's garbage time or not. I mean, these things that's how fantasy just operates. So I think people who are poo-pooing it as, oh, it's just garbage time, are being way too ignoring the fact that he's not been playing on defense. He's been playing on offense way more. They've talked about it. Everything is signaled towards him becoming more and more of an offensive-focused player for this team this year. And as that's been happening, the signals have been working better and better towards him having a breakout game. And then it happened. Can we be excited about it? And then the team's talking this week about him being their wide receiver 1 going forward over, wide receiver 1. Maybe I would say more like the most targeted wide receiver. It depends what your definition of wide receiver 1 is. Nonetheless, you got those little rumblings coming out. So I'm not saying I'm buying it totally. Travis Hunter's just going to be a stud going forward. I do think there's a chance, though, that this was his rookie breakout, and it's going to be good. It took Justin Jefferson until week 9. The first 9 weeks, he had like 2 big games, and then for the rest of the season, his rookie season we're talking about, he dominated. These things happen. It takes rookies time. Matthew Golden, be a little bit patient. If you can't be patient and you got to drop them, okay, go right ahead, but try to be patient. Nonetheless, a lot more mouths to feed there in Green Bay and how that offense operates, and they want to be run first, so, that doesn't help. That's going to bring us on to this next tier. These are we're in flex territory here. You don't need to get these guys on the field, but I feel pretty good about giving a shot to these guys about what the outcome might be, and that's going to start off with my fade, another fade here in Jordan Addison, going up against Detroit, so that's part of why I have them ranked this high. They're going to be throwing a lot, they're going to be trying to keep up, so I think that aspect works well, but I am, once again, concerned about the J.J. McCarthy return, and I don't believe Jordan Addison and J.J., well, they haven't had too much time together to develop much chemistry either. Romeo, so I just expect it to be worse than it was with Wentz, at least in the short term. Romeo Doubs going up against Carolina. Green Bay is probably going to want to turn to the run, but they're going to probably pass to get there, and there will be scoring opportunities, one of the higher expected implied point totals there. Wan'Dale Robinson going against San Francisco, he gets the targets. Stephon Diggs, things have been looking good for him recently. A little bit of a tougher matchup against Atlanta. A.J. Terrell, I know they get gashed last week by Waddle, and I don't know that Terrell, follows Stephon Diggs into the slot. I don't think he shadows him. I think he covers whichever of Stephon Diggs or Kayshon Boutte for the most part throughout the game, depending on where they're lining up, would be my best guess. So there are still some opportunities for both him and Kayshon Boutte to be getting open in that game. DJ Moore, a lot of opportunities here going up against Cincinnati. Should be a higher scoring game. So once again, going to feel okay having to play him. Troy Franklin, Alec Pierce, both going to be loves of the week for me. I couldn't pick between them. Alec Pierce, Pittsburgh, they refused to get out of this man single high. Alec Pierce could absolutely feed against that. Hopefully there will be enough target opportunities for that. Hopefully this Pittsburgh offense can put up some points against Indianapolis in order to help feed this passing attack for Indianapolis so it doesn't become all JT and then that fades away. That's always possible. And then Troy Franklin going up against Houston. Once again, Derek Stingley, expect him to be covering Cortland Sutton. Might be able to do a pretty decent job against that. So then we go on to the next best wide receiver to potentially have a big game. Very, very possible. The targets actually are starting to turn out to be fairly consistent for him as of late. So hopefully, and on the season are pretty high, moderately high. So that's good. Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, both of these guys, they're going up against Jacksonville. It feels like a good matchup. It's not the worst matchup, but it's also not the best matchup in the world. And Jacoby Myers, it's been rough as of late prior to their bye week. And Trey Tucker, the targets aren't the high. It's a little bit hard to expect any given week. I'm afraid that I might have both of these guys ranked too high, but at the same time, I expect one of them will probably justify this and score, better than wide receiver 38 or 39 on the week. I don't know which one. Darnell Mooney going up against New England. If we got Christian Gonzalez covering up against Denver, Drake London, and Drake London maybe still a little banged up from injury and everything, could see Darnell Mooney get some targets and have a good game. But I know you Darnell Mooney people are probably not going to want to play him in not the best matchup of the world. Khalil Shakir is a fade of the week for me going up against Kansas City. This is a matchup issue. Kansas City does pretty well with the slot kinds of receivers. They've got their best cornerback really can match up against that. So I wouldn't be shocked if Khalil Shakir has a limited day against Kansas City. Nonetheless, lots of, scoring opportunities in a game that we expect to be pretty high scoring here probably, but there is some concern there for me. So I'm going to fade Khalil Shakir a little bit lower in my rankings than he could be, given how he's performed on the season. As you can see, pretty much one of the top in this tier. And then we've got Kayshon Boutte also up there near the top of the tier. Still, the targets on the season have been low. As of late, it's been good. That's why he's ranked here and not down in the next tier or something like that. But also, A.J. Terrell at Atlanta defense has been good on the season. I expect New England will be able to continue to move the ball, though, against Atlanta in one form or another. Also, Demario Douglas, I think, a low-key, could get a decent amount of targets in this game, as well as the forgotten man, possibly, against a pass rush that's been able to get to the quarterback on opposite sides of the field. You get rid of that ball quickly. Could be part of the game plan. Rashid Shaheed going up against the Rams, nothing to be too afraid of here. Could have him higher for sure. Josh Downs, too, going up against Pittsburgh. Once again, it's a good matchup. I wouldn't be opposed to playing Josh Downs if I have to. Marquise Brown, too. Lots of touchdown types of opportunities. He got a target into the red zone. I don't know if it was exactly into the end zone. I can't recall. This week, again, he didn't get a whole lot of targets, though, either. So, he's a little bit iffy in terms of the floor, but I still think he'll have some big weeks, and Buffalo. Keon Coleman on the opposite side of the field. With my concerns about Khalil Shakir, this might be a game where Keon Coleman, if Buffalo's going to win, it's going to be because Keon Coleman has a big day, or at least has whether it's fantasy big or not, at least has a big day in contributing towards the game plan. I think that's possible. So, I kind of like him. Obviously, you know what Jameson Williams is. You know the concerns about Kendrick Bourne. But going against the New York Giants, I'm not going to write him off completely yet. Christian Watson, it is only 4 targets, has a big week. That's all great. But this is a game, once again, that could be Green Bay running a lot is possible. I don't know that Carolina necessarily matches up against this Green Bay defense too well. So I do kind of agree with this big spread here, whereas I haven't always agreed with it for the Green Bay Packers in previous weeks. In terms of when it's been a bigger spread. Malik Washington against Baltimore, I think with the tight end situation, whereas we could see him continue to be a little bit more improved in a game against Baltimore, who has struggled and allowed a lot of fantasy points. Jalen Noel, Cooper Kupp, Jameer DK, Darius Slayton, I think all solid plays if you're in deeper leagues or if you're just in a pinch. Bye weeks got you in trouble, whatever the case may be. And then we've got our last tier of guys who, comfortable is not the right word, but if I got to take a shot with somebody, this is the list of names that I feel like I want to take the shot with. Torrey Horton, Matthew Golden, Alec Iomanner, Xavier Legette, Rashad Bateman, Calvin Austin, Marvin Mims, Parker Washington, Michael Wilson, Demario Douglas, and Olamide Zaccheaus. And then we got the other guys there that still can't really bank on in any big way. I am assuming for Houston, I will change the rankings if Nico Collins is expected to be out again, but at this point I am ranking him, so that is part of the reason for the rankings for the Houston wide receivers. We've got Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Cleveland, and another team on bye, the New York Jets. And then I'm currently not ranking any of these guys. Josh Palmer, Luther Burden, Christian Kirk, Jordan Whittington, Whittington, Tutu Atwell, Ricky Pearsall, maybe he comes back this week, Calvin Ridley, maybe he comes back this week, Chris Moore, Jalen Lane, Luke McCaffrey. Currently not expecting these guys to have a chance of coming back in Cedric Tillman, Dontavian Wicks, Jaden Reed, Josh Reynolds, and Mike Evans. So that is it for the Week 9 wide receiver rankings. Thank you so very much. Have a good day.